on global turbulence, sources and solutions. I'm Schreiber, the General Manager of the World Academy of Art and Science. This is the third event in an ongoing series of discussions that began with two webinars last summer and continued with a one-day meeting in Baku this past March. The concept paper you received as part of your invitation was shaped by a provisional insight gathered during these two early sessions. The topic of this webinar is not new to the World Academy. In 1999, we posed the question, what is the process of global human evolution? And for the past 25 years, we've been asking this profound question about the future of humanity. It's a question, obviously, that's too vast to answer in today's webinar, but essential to keep asking as we navigate our uncertain world. Our focus today is on how we can collectively reduce the rising levels of global turbulence affecting nearly every part of the world today. While past meetings have helped identify common symptoms and characteristics of this turbulence, today we'll delve deeper, beyond surface effects, to examine the root causes and explore what kinds of solutions might address them. Rather than analyzing issues country by country, our emphasis will be on the shared challenges confronting humanity as a whole. This webinar is a step in a broader journey of inquiry, which will continue at a 3-day online conference hosted by WAAS in June and July. We expect today's conversation to raise more questions than answers, but that is by design. We invite you to engage, question, and consider joining this evolving network of thought and action, and thank you for being here. Before we get started, just some practical issues before we begin. All participants, other than the panelists, are invisible and muted, but we do welcome your questions throughout the next 2 hours. If you have a question, please raise your hand. The moderators will see you. Alternatively, please put your question in the chat bar, and we will do our best to get a response from our panelists. We also welcome you to stay on this call beyond the 2-hour session, where we hope to open up the discussion broadly to all participants who would like to engage more directly, either with each other or with our panelists. Now it gives me great pleasure to hand over to the co-sponsors of today's event, Peter Schlosser, Director of the Global Futures Lab at Arizona State University, and Iveta Silova, Associate Dean and Professor of the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State, for their opening remarks. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Grant. Indeed, we have reached, in my view, a decisive moment in the evolution of humanity, civilization, whichever you want to use. Some people say civilization has reached crossroads. And this is not coming out of nowhere. We actually have to say that, we had an unusual period since World War II with relatively little conflict and wars. That, not to say that there were none, there were significant issues, but compared to the period before, it was a relatively quiet period. At the same time, underlying processes played out, and in essence, we were moving into the Anthropocene, an era where we see human impact everywhere on the Earth system, from the outer atmosphere to the deep ocean, but also expressing themselves in societal systems. So since about the beginning of the 1880s, we went through a cascade of accelerations that pushed us more and more into a situation where humankind moved out of equilibrium with the rest of the Earth systems, where we forgot that we are part of nature, where we thought in an anthropocentric fashion, we actually control, quote unquote, control or steward nature, rather than trying to figure out how can we actually live in balance with what the life supporting systems can provide for us, not recognizing that we overexploited them. And that got us then into a situation where increasingly we felt the Earth systems, in essence, talking back to us, sending us signals, telling us that we are moving into a position that cannot be sustained. Now, you could say at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where these accelerations began, people simply did not understand limits. Everything seemed limitless. resources, space, everything. But we also have then to recognize that at least since the early 1970s, Earth Day, Club of Rome report, Silent Spring, and others, we cannot say we did not know. We did not have the warnings. So in essence, we slept through half a century and let the effects of our activities on our planet accumulate to the point where we now have severe pressure points. Typically, over the past few decades, most of that was studies from the perspective of the environmental systems. For example, planetary boundaries. If you go through the evolution of the hypothesis of planetary boundaries, a lot of them were created around limits on the natural systems. Only slowly did we recognize that we are hitting these limits because we made choices in our social systems that led to overexploitation of these environmental boundaries. So now we are actually in a situation where we have almost a feedback loop. We have overexploited the environmental systems. They set limits to what we can do, and that puts more pressure on them. So that's something that we have to figure out how to press, to move against. Here at the Global Futures Laboratory, from the beginning of its design, we actually put not the environmental systems at the core, which is often happening in our peer institutions, but what we shorthand societal will, recognizing that the way we move on this planet, the way we make decisions, which value systems underlie them, is the key to understand. And that is still way under-researched, much less understood than some of the environmental systems. So as an academic community, I think we have to change our approach. We have to put human behavior and the understanding thereof and the consequences of human actions that comes from that at the center of our efforts moving forward. And that, of course, includes not just understanding how humans behave, how value systems, belief systems are moving through generations, but naturally that gets into the domain of education. How are we actually making sure that we are educating the next generations and those yet to be born differently? How do we make sure that in their curricula, these items are actually embedded as a natural part of the education early on, actually pre-K? How can we make sure that this understanding of a holistic approach is the way to go forward rather than the more discipline-oriented approach that we have taken? And it was, just to be clear, it was very successful, but it took us from the original idea of the university and what a university should do and what academia should do into a mode of operation that lost sight of connectivities. And understanding connectivities is key. Getting that understanding into young minds, using the methods that are most easy for them to use, to learn. They are learning differently than we did. We have to understand that. We have to work with them to co-develop education. That, I think, is one of our biggest challenges. And what that means for us is listening more to these young voices, because we are leaving them with quite a few challenges. We are still on a trajectory where we are narrowing their option space at a breathtaking rate. At the same time, we are saying, yeah, they are the ones who are our hope. They're the ones who will solve the problems. That's probably true, but not without us giving up some of the ways in which we are moving on this planet. Not without giving them not just a voice, but also agency. Also giving them a space in which their decisions, or where they are part of the decision making. And that is tricky for many people. We have an easy time to say we have to listen more to the youth. We actually do, but then to take the next step of saying, what does that mean for their agency moving forward? What does that mean for their ability to be part of the decision making of their future, not ours? And so we have to rethink in the overall context of how we move as human beings, as one species out of 10 million known species, with the ability to lead to a species-induced mass extinction. How can we, in this context, make sure that the next generations still have options to shape life according to their desires? How are we willing and able to put some of the decision making into their hands and do that jointly? So that's the way I see that. That's the way we are looking at it from the fundamental design and action space of the Global Futures Lab. I know that WAAS, all the units that are represented here and are listening to this conversation, to this event this morning, are signing on in principle to the same thing. But I think we are all still in the soul searching mode. We have not yet made it from that soul searching mode into a mode where action is accelerating. So I hope that the discussion today, the ones that followed, based on the ones that have happened, will actually build more momentum around that topic and will help us propel into a future where we are turning the corner and recognize that we have to be more humble, understanding that we are one part of the Earth system, that we have actually pushed out of our space, our domain, and that we actually have to do everything we can to move back into equilibrium with what Earth can support. We, at some point, decided that we want to live on a planet it's about 10 times the one we have. Well, that won't work. And moving off that planet, as some people seem to dream of, will not work either. If we would be able to create living conditions on the moon, on Mars, wherever outside there, that would be the ultimate stratification of society. A few people could float out there and the rest would perish on our planet. So let's not go there. Let's make sure that we understand that our planet is our home, that there is still a chance, although the window is closing, to make that work without too many losses. And let's work together on that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Great words. Iveta, you have extensive experience with international education. What are your observations right now?
Well, my observation too are that we are in turbulence, major turbulence, and it's not just in the air. It's in our systems, in our institutions, and in our everyday lives in education. And it's increasingly full, our lives increasingly full with uncertainty, instability, and a sense that the future is arriving much faster than our ability to respond. And education systems are known for responding too slowly, too late to what we are facing. And in fact, not doing a good job in anticipating what may come next. And but this turbulence isn't just a symptom. It's as Peter said, it's also a signal that something deeper is shifting, that the old structures are breaking down, but also new patterns are struggling to emerge, and not just in what we do, but also in how we think, how we relate, how we learn, and actually ultimately pushing us to rethink who we are as human beings on this planet. And this is why we created the G-Forces, a global futures-oriented collective on education for sustainability, a National Science Foundation grant that just was terminated 3 weeks ago because it no longer meets government priorities. But with this network of networks that we were bringing together around education for global futures, more sustainable global futures, we were not trying to stabilize the old. We were trying to work with the turbulence, to recognize it as energy of a world in transition, and to ask what role education can play in shaping what comes next. And G-forces is not just a clever acronym, but a very deliberate metaphors that we wanted to use, because real transformation comes with pressure, with acceleration, with resistance to inertia. That's G-force. That's what it feels like when something begins to shift. So G-forces was built to meet this momentum, a global interdisciplinary collaboration to reimagine education for planetary well-being, for ecological justice, for system level change, not just in theory, but in practice. So we were connecting research networks and designing new learning ecosystems, not just to improve education, but very fundamentally and radically transform it. And so even though the NSF terminated the grant because because of the current moment, we also believe that what we already put in motion is unstoppable anyway. So the ideas are already out there, the relationships are in motion, the need to fundamentally transform education only intensified. And therefore, we welcome a chance to reconnect and to explore new synergies across our networks and across our work. Not everything we planned has gone as planned, but maybe that's also the point, because turbulence doesn't follow a script. It's very unpredictable, so it kind of pushed us into this moment. So here we are now together, so let's see what we can do together. We really look forward to the opportunity to explore the synergies and perhaps intensify the synergies across our work. So thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much, Iveta.